Hello everyone, DarkOfAllTrades here. Out of all of my content, the videos that seem to get the most diverse reactions are ones where I talk about morality. Now, I love discussing the idea of morality, and I feel I can explain my system and why I hold to it quite well. I don't particularly want to be the guy that just talks about morality, but since it is a hot topic, I suppose one more is absolutely manageable. For this video, I'm taking a dive back about 8 years. This is an excerpt from an apologist named Tim Barnett, who is now of Red Pen Logic, which as a teacher is a direct insult to me and my profession. The video is titled, If Evil Exists, Atheism is False. Okay, so from the title it looks like we have the start of an actual argument. We have the first premise in the title. Since he is an apologist, I'm going to be so presumptuous and assume that the conclusion is going to be, therefore atheism is false. So right now it looks like this. I look forward to seeing how this fills in though. There is realistically only one thing that he could put in premise 2 to make this argument valid, and that is, evil exists. Of course, this is not a sound argument, but I'm going to guess he's going to try to justify premise 1 for this video. I also have a minor problem with premise 2. I'm not sure what is meant by evil in this argument. I don't believe that evil as a noun exists. I do think that evil exists as a way to describe actions or behaviors that are considered morally wrong or harmful. The term evil is a label for the actions rather than a tangible and independent entity. When someone says X person is evil, what they're doing is saying X person does evil things, maybe more than they do good things. The person themselves do the evil things. I suppose the person themselves could be evil, making the term an adjective. The term describes rather than is. So in this sense, evil does not exist as an entity. But what do you think? Do you think evil exists as a noun? Or do you agree with me that it is a verb or an adjective, but not a noun itself? Or are you in some middle ground? Let me know in the comments below. Anyway, we're here looking for the justification, so let's hear what Tim has to say.
But what about atheism? What about atheism? Well, it turns out examples of evil in the world actually show that atheism is false too. Yeah, you heard me right. If evil's real, then atheism is false. Evil actually proves that God exists. It doesn't disprove his existence. Let me show you.
Well, that depends on what you mean by God. This touches on the classic argument, the problem of evil. Tim here seems to be saying that the argument has it backwards. So Tim, how does evil prove God exists?
Most people recognize for there to be a universal, objective moral law that's out there, that's outside of me or a culture, then an absolute moral lawgiver must exist.
You know, I came in with low expectations and somehow I am still disappointed. I've covered better versions of the moral argument before, but let's take a look at this one a little bit closer. Broken down into a syllogistic form, it looks like this. Premise 1. If there is objective moral law, it must have a source or origin. Premise 2. The best explanation for the existence of objective moral law is the presence of a moral lawgiver. Conclusion, therefore there is a moral lawgiver. So what are the core issues of this argument? The argument assumes that there must be an objective, universal moral law. Some moral anti-realists or relativists argue that morality is subjective or culturally relative, meaning there is no single universally applicable moral standard. Even if one accepts the existence of an objective moral law, one can argue that it doesn't necessarily follow that the law requires a supernatural or divine source. Secular moral frameworks such as ethical naturalism or moral realism, without invoking a deity, propose alternative explanations for the existence of objective morality. The moral argument relies on conceptual reasoning rather than empirical evidence. Unlike scientific arguments, which often rely on observable and testable phenomena, the moral argument is based on abstract concepts and philosophical reasoning. Evolutionary psychology and biology offer alternative explanations for the development of human moral sentiments. Many believe that morality has evolved as a social and adaptive trait rather than being imposed by a divine lawgiver. However, even if one accepts the idea of a moral lawgiver, there is still the challenge of determining which, if any, of the world's religious or philosophical traditions accurately represents the will or nature of this moral lawgiver. Different religions and belief systems often have conflicting moral principles. As I think we're going to touch on here, the existence of widespread suffering and moral evil in the world is seen as incompatible with the idea of an all-powerful, all-knowing, and benevolent moral lawgiver. So even granting the premises and the conclusion, Tim would still need to show that it is not only a being, but that being would still exist, and that being is his variation of some god.
okay? However, if God does not exist, then there is no objective moral standards.
As I pointed out before, this also needs to be demonstrated. Why couldn't there be objective moral standards without Tim's God? Could it be a goddess? Could it be my magical primordial space crystal? Why does objective moral standards rely on Tim's God? Natural law theorists argue that objective moral standards are grounded in the inherent nature of the world and human beings, and that the moral principles are derived from an understanding of human nature and the natural order. Virtue ethicists contend that objective moral standards are rooted in the development of virtuous character traits. What is morally right is connected to the cultivation of virtues like honesty, courage, and compassion. Some ethical theories, such as those proposed by thinkers like John Rawls, suggest that objective moral standards are based on a hypothetical social contract agreed upon by rational individuals. Each of these perspectives provides a different account of what could serve as a basis for objective moral standards. Consequentialism asserts that the basis for objective moral standards is the consequences of actions. The rightness or wrongness of an action is determined by the overall good or happiness it produces. Deontological theories, like those of Immanuel Kant, argue that objective moral standards are based on inherent principles or duties that we are obligated to follow regardless of the consequences. All of these perspectives provide a different account of what could serve as a basis for objective moral standards that do not include some God. So even if I did accept the objective moral standards, I reject this argument flat out.
Therefore, atheists are left with moral relativism.
Are we? Are we really? I just gave a bunch of examples as to how there could be objective morals without a God. That makes this a fallacy called the black or white fallacy, or the false dichotomy. Tim is saying that there are objective morals if a God exists, but if not, the only other option is moral relativism, when there are clearly other alternatives. If there's interest, I would be happy to go into other forms of morality like humanism, utilitarianism, Kantian ethics, Rawlsian justice, contractualism, or any number of forms of secular morality that do not fall under the category of moral relativism. This is a monumentally ignorant position for Tim to take. That or he's intentionally trying to scare his audience with relativism, spooky. But go on, Tim. Tell us about moral relativism.
What's that? Moral relativism says there's no objective moral values and duties. There's no right, there's no wrong, there's no good, there's no evil. Okay? That's moral relativism. Things are just right for you, but maybe not right for me. Okay?
Maybe not objectively, but moral relativism doesn't inherently deny the existence of good or evil, right or wrong. It challenges the idea that there are objective universal standards for these concepts. Let me take a brief moment for this. Moral relativism is a broad and varied set of views, but at its core, it asserts that moral judgments are not universally true or false, and are instead dependent on cultural, societal, or individual perspectives. Moral relativism acknowledges that moral beliefs and practices can vary across cultures, societies, or individuals. What is considered morally acceptable in one context may be deemed immoral in another. The central tenet of moral relativism is the rejection of a universal moral standard that applies to all people, times, and places. This doesn't necessarily mean that moral relativists deny the existence of a moral distinction, but rather they don't see these distinctions as context-dependent. I don't think Tim actually knows what moral relativism is. I think he has a sentence or two of these buzz phrases that are meant to scare the audience to thinking moral relativism bad, without any real thought about it.
And so on relativism, right and wrong are either a matter of personal preference, or maybe they're an invented social convention of our culture.
That is at least something close to cultural relativism. It could be even close to constructivism. There are kinds of morality that disagree, but at least that is one idea of how morality came to be what it is.
Maybe they're an illusion created by evolution to aid in our survival.
This is a perspective within evolutionary ethics. This hypothesis suggests that moral instincts and behaviors have evolved because they provided an advantage to our ancestors in terms of group cohesion, cooperation, and the ability to navigate social complexities. It is important to note that evolutionary explanations for morality don't necessarily determine the moral truth or falsity of specific behaviors or actions. Even if certain moral tendencies have evolved, it doesn't automatically mean that those tendencies are morally right or just. Furthermore, while evolutionary explanations provide insights into the potential origins of moral behaviors, they are not the only way to understand morality. Many ethical theories, as I've already stated, include deontology, consequentialism, and virtue ethics, which offer an alternative perspectives on moral philosophy that are not strictly tied to evolutionary accounts. What do you think the odds are Tim is going to talk about those? Slim, probably.
In fact, listen to Richard Dawkins, okay? famous atheist. He says this: in a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason for it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, listen, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. That's where atheism leads. Consistent atheism says there is no evil, there is no good.
Richard Dawkins isn't some atheist pope. I don't particularly care what he has to say on anything other than his field of expertise, which is biology. But since Tim seems to think this is important, let's examine the part of the quote he's trying to use to back up his claim. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. So what does this mean? Let me break it down briefly. No design. This part suggests that upon observation, the universe doesn't exhibit characteristics that imply a deliberate design or creation by an intelligent designer or creator. No purpose. The statement posits that the universe lacks inherent purpose or meaning. In other words, there is no predetermined or intended goal for the existence of the cosmos. No evil, no good. This implies a rejection of inherent moral qualities in the universe. There is no ultimate standard of good or evil built into the fabric of the cosmos. Nothing but pitiless indifference. This phrase conveys the idea that the universe, as observed, operates without sympathy or concern for the well-being or suffering of conscious beings. It is indifferent to human values, desires, or experiences. In essence, Dawkins is expressing the perspective aligned with atheism, naturalism, and a scientific worldview that seeks to understand the universe without invoking supernatural explanations. From this standpoint, the features of the universe are seen as the result of natural processes and mechanisms with no underlying purpose, design, or moral framework. Does that mean that people can't think there are objective standards? Absolutely not. Dawkins could still be entirely correct here, and natural law theorists would still be valid. Again, this is really pushing that false dichotomy.
Don't just take his word for it. This is philosopher of science Michael Roos. Now, he completely agrees on this point. There's an article in The Guardian. I encourage you to read it. It's called "God is Dead, Long Live Morality." Now, this is what he says. He says, morality is just a matter of emotions, like liking ice cream and sex and hating toothache and marking student papers. But it is and has to be a funny kind of emotion. It has to pretend that it is not that at all. If we thought that morality was no more like liking or not liking spinach, then pretty quickly it would break down. He goes on to say, so morality has to come across as something that is more than emotion. It has to appear to be objective, even though it's really subjective. It's really subjective. You see what's going on there? So he wants it to appear like it's objective, but he says, no, deep down it's really subjective. What does that mean? What does it mean to be subjective? Well, subjective morality is completely determined by the subject.
I am not sure I actually agree with this. I subscribe to what could be called subjective morality. It is true that in the context of individual subjective moralities, moral values and judgments are determined by the beliefs, feelings, and personal experiences of each individual. Each person is seen as having the autonomy to decide what they consider morally right or wrong. However, the subjective morality can also extend to a cultural level, where moral values are seen as products of cultural norms and traditions. In this case, what is considered morally acceptable may vary across different societies. Subjective morality allows for a variety of ethical systems to coexist. Different individuals or cultures may have divergent moral frameworks that are considered valid within their own contexts. Subjective morality does not necessarily imply moral relativism, where all moral perspectives are considered equally valid. Subjective morality acknowledges the diversity of moral views, but does not make judgments about their relative validity or morality. I'll leave a link in the description to the Guardian article, and you can read it for yourself and see if what Tim is saying here accurately reflects what is said in the article.
I determine what's right and wrong, just like I like chocolate ice cream versus vanilla.
I'm going to say something potentially controversial here. This isn't necessarily wrong. I decide what I like just like I decide what is moral or not. The issue I have with this gross oversimplification is that it severely downplays the significance and complexity of moral decision-making and makes the determination of right and wrong within a subjective morality into this arbitrary or inconsequential idea. Moral choices often involve more profound considerations, ethical reasonings, and a complex interplay of factors. Moral decisions are not regarded as arbitrary or inconsequential in the way that choosing between ice cream flavors might be. Everyone, to some extent, forms their own conclusions about what is right or wrong. Different factors influence the development of moral beliefs, including cultural background, personal experiences, religious and philosophical views, and social influences. As a result, people may arrive at diverse and sometimes conflicting conclusions about morality.
Okay, so morality becomes about likes and dislikes, personal preference. Some people like strawberry ice cream, some people don't. Some people like to rate people, and some people don't. You see where this leads?
Oh wow, that took a very hard turn. This is exactly what I was saying before. He is downplaying the idea of how subjective morality works. It isn't so simplistic as to say, well, this is just a matter of my personal preference, therefore I need to be okay with what you prefer. I can still find assaulting someone abhorrent and tell you it's wrong within my morality and actively fight against you if you think it's acceptable within your morality. That doesn't make my views less subjective. That doesn't mean I'm appealing to some objective source for my morality. I'm actually bothered by this way of thinking, specifically using the examples Tim uses here. I'm going to take a break for a moment and calm down. So in my script writing, I actually took a break and had to calm myself down. This comparison was that bad. I think, in the most charitable way I can here, he is saying that within my subjective morality, it is only my opinion that assaulting someone is bad, and I can't back it up with anything other than my opinion. Well, it isn't only my opinion. In my worldview, I can show why my opinion should likely be agreed to, even if people come to it for different reasons. I think my reasons are sufficient. It causes immense harm, which leads to a lower quality of life for the victim. If we take something like John Rawls' veil of ignorance and make a world where this could happen, would you be okay if you were the one being assaulted? I would guess not. But there are some weird people, not judging you weird people. So if you wouldn't like it being done to you because it decreases your well-being, then perhaps we, as a collective, could be justified asserting that it is bad, though entirely subjectively.
It's all just emotions and likes and dislikes. But if it's just likes and dislikes, how do you say that's wrong?
Like this. That's wrong. Just because my standard is subjective to me doesn't mean I can't say things are wrong. Subjective morality implies that moral values and judgments are based on individuals' perspectives, emotions, and/or personal experiences. Meaning I can and do make moral judgments. The fact that they're based on something you don't base your moral judgments on doesn't make them not exist or less valid. Tim is continuing to diminish the subjective morality position, and it really is quite irksome.
I mean, imagine someone said, well, I like vanilla ice cream. Whoa! What's wrong with you? That's wrong. No, that's crazy to say something like that.
And why is that, Tim? Is it because it is an arbitrary and inconsequential position to hold that has effectively no effect on anything external to the person, short of what ice cream they're more likely to buy? Someone having a preference to a kind of ice cream doesn't cause harm. Simply liking anything doesn't itself cause harm. Now, you could try to eat multiple gallons of ice cream, and that would cause harm. Liking assaulting people outside of the implication that you would have had to have done it to know you liked it itself doesn't cause harm. It is the taking of the action that you like that causes the harm. I could even argue that in a form of objective morality, Tim holds some immoral beliefs. Heck, I just need to change the properties of the God that he believes in ever so slightly, and Tim is an immoral monster by objective standards.
But that's what ends up happening. It's kind of like this. Imagine this conversation with an atheist. The atheist says, I can't believe in God. Why not? Brussels sprouts. Wait, what's the problem with, what's the problem? Have you tasted those things? They're disgusting. I can't believe in a God who would make something so distasteful to me.
Ah, I see where he's going with this. Of course, it is a bad argument, but at least I can see it. This is the idea of, a God would not allow things I don't like to exist. There are things I don't like that exist, therefore God doesn't exist. It is a caricature of the problem of evil. This is an attempt at an argumentum ad absurdum, but falls short and becomes an appeal to ridicule fallacy. It is a type of appeal to emotion that also borders on a straw man. It is a rhetorical tactic that mocks an opponent's argument, attempting to inspire a strong emotional reaction in the audience and to highlight any counterintuitive aspects of that argument, making it appear foolish and contrary to common sense. This is typically done by mocking the argument's representative foundation in an uncharitable and oversimplified way. It is pretty bad, and again, for some reason, I expected better.
How foolish is that? But on atheism, this is the problem of evil. This is what it amounts to. This kind of thing. And so for there to be a real problem of evil, morality has to be objective, not subjective.
This is not the case. The question of whether morality needs to be objective or subjective for the problem of evil to be a substantial challenge depends on the specific version of the problem of evil being considered and the underlying assumption of the discussion. If one assumes that morality is objective, that there are universal external standards of good and evil, then the problem of evil can be framed as a challenge to reconcile the existence of evil with the attributes of an all-powerful, all-good God. In this context, the objective nature of morality provides a basis for evaluating the actions in the world. If one assumes morality is subjective, that moral values are dependent on individual or cultural perspectives, then the problem of evil might be expressed differently. It could be framed as a challenge to reconcile the existence of suffering and moral disagreement with the concept of a benevolent deity. The subjectivity of morality could raise questions about why different individuals or cultures perceive good and evil differently. Some discussions acknowledge a mix of objective and subjective elements in morality. For example, certain moral principles might be considered objective while allowing for variation in how they are applied based on cultural or individual differences. In discussions about the problem of evil, philosophers and theologians consider not only the nature of morality, but also related concepts such as free will, limits of human understanding, and the purposes or intentions of a deity. The nature of morality, whether objective or subjective, influences how the problem is formulated and addressed within different philosophical and theological frameworks.
But if there is this objective moral standard, then actually God must exist. If things like racism and murder and abuse are really evil, objectively, not just personal preferences like ice cream, then there must be an objective moral standard. And that transcendent moral standard that applies to everyone is God. It's actually his nature, okay? In fact, I can sum up everything I just said the last 10 minutes with this one quote from C.S. Lewis from Mere Christianity. He says, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. That's the problem of evil. That was his argument. It's cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing the universe to when I called it unjust? Of course, I could have given up my idea of justice, that's relativism, by saying that it was nothing but a private idea of my own, so I could have gone the relativist route. But if I did, then my argument, the problem of evil, against God collapsed with it. Collapsed too, right? It's all right there.
I don't know what C.S. Lewis thought, but this is one of the easier questions if you think about it for just a moment. If you go outside and it's negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit, you may say it's cold outside. But what are you comparing it to when you call it cold? There are a number of things. The experience of temperature is subjective and varies from person to person. What feels cold to one person might feel warm to another, depending on their individual preferences and tolerances. When you say it's cold outside at negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit, you're implicitly comparing the current temperature to a standard or norm. This standard could be the average temperature of the region, the individual's comfort zone, or some other reference point. Different cultures and geographical regions have varying standards for what is considered cold or hot. A temperature that feels bitterly cold in one region might be considered mild in another. The term cold is a relative descriptor used to communicate a sensation. It doesn't have an absolute value. Its meaning depends on the context of the individual's frame of reference. Just as the perception of temperature depends on the individual's experience of cultural norms, judgments about morality can be influenced by individuals' beliefs, cultural values, and ethical standards. What one person considers morally acceptable might be deemed unacceptable by another, and these judgments are often shaped by individual, cultural, or philosophical perspectives. So what can you compare the universe to when you call it unjust? Your judgment of the universe is unjust may be based on human moral or ethical standards. If you believe in certain principles of fairness or moral rightness, you may be evaluating the universe against these principles. Cultural and societal standards of justice might influence your judgment. Different cultures and societies have varying ideas about what is just, and your assessment could be shaped by the values and norms of your particular cultural context. Your individual beliefs and values play a significant role in how you perceive justice. If you hold particular moral or philosophical views, your judgment of the universe's justice is likely influenced by these personal convictions. Religious or spiritual beliefs often include notions of cosmic justice or divine justice. If you adhere to a particular religious framework, your assessment of the universe's justice may be informed by the moral principles outlined in your religious teachings. Certain philosophical perspectives might inform your judgment. For example, if you subscribe to a particular ethical theory or philosophical stance, your assessment of the universe's justice could be guided by the principles of that philosophy. When you declare the universe as unjust, you are implicitly appealing to some standard or concept of justice that serves as your reference point. It doesn't have to be an objective point, it just has to be a point to which you can make your evaluations. There's a lot more I could say about the quote, but I've already gone on this long. And that's the end of his video. It just abruptly ends. So let's take a look at what is actually said in this video. If evil is real, then atheism is false, and evil proves the existence of God. For there to be a universal objective moral law, an absolute moral lawgiver must exist. Without God, there would be no objective moral standards. Without God, atheists are left with the idea that right and wrong are matters of personal preference or cultural conventions. According to Richard Dawkins, atheism leads to a universe without design, purpose, good, or evil, only pitiless indifference. Subjective morality is where individuals determine what is right or wrong based on personal preferences, akin to liking or disliking ice cream flavors. An atheist disliking Brussels sprouts is like an atheist disliking evil. It is just a preference. For there to be a real problem of evil, morality must be objective and not subjective. If objective moral standards exist, then God must exist as a transcendent moral standard. This was a bit painful, but let me go all the way back to the beginning and see if this was his actual argument. Premise 1. If evil is real, then atheism is false. Premise 2. Evil is real. 3. Therefore, atheism is false. Additionally, there is an implied argument related to objective morality. Premise 1. For there to be a universal objective moral law, an absolute moral lawgiver must exist. Premise 2. God is the absolute moral lawgiver. Premise 3. Therefore, if God does not exist, there is no objective moral standards. 4. Atheism asserts that God does not exist. 5. Therefore, atheists are left with moral relativism. Even if I accepted that there was some objective moral law, I can still reject premise 1. There needs to be a justification for why there must be an absolute moral lawgiver, when we know that there are systems that hold that objective moral laws exist without a God. Even granting premise 1, premise 2 asserts that Tim's God is the absolute moral lawgiver without offering a supporting argument or evidence for the existence of this God or why his God would be the necessary source of objective morality. Premise 3 has the same issue. It is contingent on the existence of Tim's God and makes an unjustified assumption. Premise 4 simplifies the diversity within atheism. While some atheists may assert the non-existence of a God, others simply lack a belief in a God. It is an oversimplification to attribute a single assertion to all atheists. The entire argument assumes the existence of objective moral standards without addressing the philosophical challenges or diverse perspectives on moral realism and anti-realism. The argument presents a dichotomy. Either God exists and there are objective moral standards, or God does not exist and moral relativism is true. This oversimplification neglects other philosophical positions on morality. Finally, the entire argument lacks empirical or logical evidence to support the claims about the necessity of God for objective moral standards. It relies heavily on assumptions about the nature of morality and the existence of God. That's it for this one, so what did you think? Do you think the problem of evil is not a problem unless there is objective morality? Or do you think that it doesn't matter if morality is objective or subjective? The problem of evil still poses a major problem for many religy boys. Let me know in the comments below. I like the problem of evil as an argument against a God, but it is not my favorite. I think that the problem is a bit too narrow, and the common apologetic I hear is something like, God knows why, and he uses suffering and evil for his greater good, just like getting a vaccine shot as a young kid. You don't understand why you're getting it, but your parents know, and it isn't until you're older and gain the knowledge that you understand why. We are the kids in the scenario, and until we can understand why, we can't say that God doesn't exist. I don't particularly like this explanation as it seems to just mysterious ways hand-wave the issue away. If you don't think this video showed an either-or fallacy, hit that like button, or don't. You can do either or. Though if you approve of my constant atheism, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already and be part of that consistency. An extra special thanks to my patrons, Calamitous Anima, Long-Haired Lefty, Musical Ocelot, Jammin' Bomb, and Kai Henningsen, who are the moral basis to which I compare my channel's subjective evaluations. If you'd like to be one of the absolutes, you can join them for as low as $1 a month at patreon.com/DarkOfAllTrades. Having now broken 1K subscribers, it is clear that this channel is growing. I want to thank all of you who have been with me from the beginning, and I welcome all of you new subscribers. This journey so far has been a lot of work and a lot more fun. So thank you all for being here with me for it. Here's to adding the next digit on to the end. And as always, keep learning.